said you graduated.
I graduated law school, and then at that time, it was very rare for women to get hired by a, unless the firm was a relatives firm or they worked for the government. And so I went to Phoenix and came to here to try to get a job. And I ended up getting a job at the Industrial Commission. And I was introduced, and probably shouldn't say how I got hired, but it was basically, I was introduced to say, well, if everybody gets drunk, she'll stay sober enough to drive you home. And the guy that hired me said, that sounds good to me, you're hired.
So then at the Industrial Commission, that's workers' compensation, is that right? Had you ever studied workers' comp in law school?
I thought it had something to do with factories. I'd never even heard of workers' compensation. I didn't know a thing about it. And I had to write a brief almost the first time when I was there, and it was a real education to learn. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot of things not to do and things to do.
Did you work with the ALJs? How was that?
At that time, they had hearing officers.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, we had, and we represented the carrier because it was a state at that time that carried the insurance. And we did most of the writing of insurance for the state. Okay. That was before a lot of private carriers. And we did a lot of hearings, administrative hearings, a lot of medical. It was a great training ground. But there were some of the judges that didn't care for having a woman that was their hearing officers. And one of them, I know that we had a hearing at the prison, and he went down and told my boss that I don't think she should be at the prison and go to the prison and represent. And my boss said, well, I have confidence in her, and if she wants to go, it's up to her. If she's uncomfortable, I won't send her. But if she doesn't care, she's going. And he stood up to the hearing officer and said, I'm not discriminating against her just because she's a woman.
Wow. How long did you continue to work for the Industrial Commission?
By the way, that was Bob Park, and he was a wonderful, wonderful mentor.
And he was your boss at the Industrial Commission?
He was my boss at the Industrial Commission, and I worked there. I actually worked there and then moved down and was in charge of the legal department in the Tucson office for the Industrial Commission.
Is that how you got
at
back
that time?
To Tucson?
We actually had split off and became the State Compensation Fund then.
Okay.
And that's how I got back down to Tucson. But at one point, I remember that one of the commissioners, I had to go out of town and out of state, and they gave you $15 to go to travel and mileage, and I was earning next to nothing, and I said I didn't have enough money for the gas to go, and so I went up to get an advance on my travel check because they reimbursed you so many cents a mile, and the head of the commission said, well, she doesn't have a family, and she's single, and she ought to learn how to better handle her money, so she better be there, and we're not advancing. So I had to borrow the money so I could go to do the hearing. And so then they had raises, and I did not get the raise I thought I should. And that was when I was in Tucson, and I've gone down there. And so I wrote a letter to the commission and said, I cannot believe that the reason I did not get the raise up to the men or above is because I'm a woman, but I can come to no other conclusion. And so I did not get the raise then, but the next raise I got a double jump, and I was earning more than all of the men at that time, and continued to do that till I left.
Wow.
But it was, the commissioner was not going to admit any wrong, but they did make up the difference. So it was a eye-opener working there. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, but there were times where there was a difference in how you were treated. And I made some mistakes. One of the ones that I did was there were a lot of people that worked at the Industrial Commission and then the State Fund that had been there for years. And my job was to go down to claims and tell them what they needed to do on a certain case or what to do if they were doing something wrong or not. And of course, I was new and an attorney, quote, but I learned the hard way that you can't go in, you have to be diplomatic of how you do it. And it took me almost a year to gain back what I had antagonized some people that had been there a long time. And I understand because they felt like, hey, why is this person that's this young person that, just because she's a lawyer thinks she can tell us when we know the business better than she does, which they did. And so I learned the hard way. And it took me about a year before I ended up being great friends with all of the people that were there. Really, really liked them. I think they liked me and repaired some bridges. And I learned that, but it was a good lesson to learn. And it stood me well in how I approach things from then on in the future when I dealt with people.
So that's a good advice for anybody. Yeah.
And I think you have to realize that sometimes people may not have a law degree, but their experience is something that's you need to listen to, pay heed to, and then mix it up with your legal knowledge and then try to come out with a solution that everybody can live with.
How long were you at the commission?
7 years, almost 8 years, I think. Yeah, I know that because I left my retirement in, and now I have state retirement, so that's pretty nice.
Nice.
Yeah, I wasn't going to miss those matching funds.
What did you do once you left the commission?
I was hired by a law firm, Johnson, Hayes, and Dowdell. And Judge Johnson, Mercer Johnson, was just, you couldn't find a nicer guy. And he was not real thrilled when I got hired, but he really, we became great friends. I thought he was wonderful. He was a wonderful mentor also. And I ended up becoming one of the first partners in a major law firm in Tucson. Now, Sally Simmons thinks she was the first with that. I always say I was the first. I'm not sure who's right, but I think we were very lucky in a time when women just did not get those kind of positions that we were able to go into a firm and, become partners or shareholders, whatever you want to call it.
Were you still doing workers' compensation work?
At that time, I started doing business law and other kinds. I did some workers' comp. I did defense, some plaintiffs. I got into plaintiffs, Social Security, disability. And I did a lot of business law and landlord-tenant, things of that nature. And it was a good learning curve also.
So you talked about a little bit at the commission, some of the things people said with you being female, and you talked about being one of the first female partners at a firm in Tucson. Can you tell us just about that?
Well, for instance, they had their meetings at something called the Old Pueblo Club at that time, which was in the Transamerica building in Tucson. And they would have their meetings on the floor, and it was a men's grill. And so I would go, and we'd have our firm meetings, but I wasn't allowed to leave. They would put me in this room where they had the firm meetings, but I couldn't go out, the main thing, because it was all for men. And so we had the meetings there, and I was able to be a part of the meeting, obviously, but I wasn't able to go out into the, they would have to get my food and bring it in for me and all like that, because It was the men's grill. So, it was, you at that time, it was the way it was. And, I just kind of, I did what I could to improve the lot of women. That was when we started AWLA. We used to meet down in Rollis's in a cafeteria or a place down there, and we started just having informal meetings, and it evolved into the Arizona Women Lawyers Association. When I was here in Phoenix, they used to meet with Lorna Lockwood and Virginia Hash and other people that were lawyers that had been around for a long time, and they would take us under their wings and help us with things. And these were all loose meetings that eventually evolved into Arizona Women Lawyers And then I was on their board and was president of the state Arizona Women Lawyers, and as well as the Tucson Arizona Women Lawyers. And I think that it's needed, and it's still needed. I don't know if you read the latest Arizona Attorney. There was an article in the back, I can't remember who it's by, about discrimination that's still going on. And so I think that it's something that we always have to be watchful about, and that we have to try to make sure that people get where they are on their merit, and not because they are one sex or another, or one ethnic, or whatever that is the case may be. We want to make sure that there is diversity in all aspects of the legal profession, because we need to reflect in my opinion, we need to reflect what the society is and what the citizenry is of the United States.